rolling hills of Blackwater County, Virginia, were cloaked in mist, as if the land itself was reluctant to let go. Though the spring of 1869 had arrived, the chill of winter still lingered within the shadows of the Blue Ridge Mountains. For years had passed since the war's end, leaving its scars upon the landscape and upon the hearts of those who called this place home. In the small town of Elmwood, nestled between winding creeks and verdant forests, life continued at a measured pace. Carriages traversed the muddy roads. Ladies in modest dresses gathered at the general store, while men in worn suits discussed in hushed tones the challenges of rebuilding. The laughter of children playing in yards bordered by white picket fences served as a balm to a community still healing from loss. Stepping from the train, Thomas Hargrove pulled his coat tighter. The journey from Richmond had been long, the wooden seats of the passenger car unforgiving on his aging frame. At 55, Thomas was a physician who had witnessed the horrors of war, tending to wounded soldiers in field hospitals where the acrid smell of gunpowder competed with the stench of gangrene. Those memories haunted him still, appearing unbidden in the quiet moments between wakefulness and sleep. A young man approached. "Dr. Hargrove? I'm Benjamin Wells. Mayor Crawford sent me to fetch you." Thomas nodded, retrieving his medical bag and small trunk. "I appreciate the welcome, Mr. Wells. I trust the arrangements have been made for my accommodations." "Yes, sir. Mrs. Holloway has prepared a room at her boarding house." "It's the finest in town," Benjamin said, loading Thomas's belongings onto a modest wagon. The mayor would have come himself, but there was a meeting of the town council that couldn't be postponed. As they traveled through Elmwood, Thomas observed the town with a critical eye. It was smaller than he had anticipated, perhaps 500 souls in total. The main street boasted a church with a white steeple, a schoolhouse, several shops, and a courthouse that had survived the war, largely intact. Beyond the town center, farmhouses dotted the countryside, connected by narrow roads that disappeared into the woods. "Tell me about these incidents," Thomas said as they passed the town cemetery, where weathered headstones stood in silent testament to generations past. Benjamin's grip tightened on the reins. "3 children in the past month, sir. All of them gone to sleep and never woken up. No fever, no injury, no explanation at all. Just gone by morning." Thomas had received a letter from Mayor Crawford 2 weeks prior, requesting his expertise in what was described as a most unusual medical situation. Intrigued enough by his reputation as a physician who specialized in unusual cases, Thomas had accepted the invitation, though he suspected a simple explanation would present itself upon examination. "And you believe these deaths are connected?" Benjamin nodded solemnly. "They have to be, sir. Elmwood hasn't lost a child in nearly 2 years. Not since little Mary Collins succumbed to scarlet fever. Now 3 in a month. And all in the same manner. Folks are frightened." They arrived at a 2-story house with a broad porch and hanging baskets of early spring flowers. Mrs. Holloway, a widow of about 60 with silver-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun, greeted them at the door. "Dr. Hargrove, welcome to Elmwood. I've prepared our finest room for you." She led him up a narrow staircase to a modest but clean chamber with a brass bed, a writing desk, and a washstand. "Supper is at 6 o'clock sharp. The mayor and Reverend Porter will be joining us. I expect they'll want to discuss the situation." Thomas thanked her, and once alone, unpacked his belongings. From his medical bag, he retrieved a leather-bound journal and a fountain pen. He had documented unusual cases throughout his career, finding that the practice of writing helped to clarify his thoughts. On the first blank page, he wrote, "Elmwood, Virginia. April 12, 1869. Investigation of unexplained childhood deaths." At supper, Mayor Crawford, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers and an air of perpetual concern, wasted no time in addressing the matter at hand. "We're grateful you've come, Doctor. Our town physician, Dr. Matthews, is at a loss. He's tended to the needs of Elmwood for 20 years. But this has left him baffled. 3 children," Thomas said, "all passing in their sleep without apparent cause." Reverend Porter, a thin man with hollow cheeks and intense eyes, leaned forward. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, Dr. Hargrove, but there are some in town who whisper of darker forces at work." Mrs. Holloway made a small sound of disapproval as she served roasted chicken and potatoes. "Superstitious nonsense. There's a reasonable explanation, I'm certain." "Perhaps," the Reverend conceded. "But the circumstances are unusual. Each child reported hearing singing before bed. A lullaby, they said. A beautiful voice that made them sleepy." Thomas paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "A lullaby? From whom?" "That's just it," Mayor Crawford said. "No one knows. The parents heard nothing. Only the children spoke of it, and only on the night he trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought." "I'd like to speak with the families tomorrow," Thomas said, "and examine any records Dr. Matthews has kept regarding the deaths." "Of course," the mayor agreed. "Benjamin will take you wherever you need to go." The Hendersons were the first to lose a child, their son Isaac, just 6 years old. Then the Pattersons lost their daughter Emma, age 8. And just last week, the miller's son Samuel, who was 7. The following morning dawned grey and damp. Thomas breakfasted on porridge and coffee before setting out with Benjamin to visit Dr. Matthews. The local physician's office was attached to his home, a modest structure near the edge of town. Dr. Matthews was older than Thomas had expected, well into his 70s, with gnarled hands that spoke of decades of service. His office smelled of camphor and alcohol, the shelves lined with bottles of various medicines and tinctures. "I've examined each child thoroughly," Matthews said, presenting his notes. "No signs of disease, no evidence of trauma. Their hearts simply stopped. In 45 years of practice, I've never encountered anything like it." "And no common factors?" "No shared meals, no exposure to the same illness." Matthews shook his head. "The families have little interaction, different churches, different social circles. The only commonality is this business about the singing, which I attributed to childish imagination or perhaps a dream before death." Thomas studied the notes carefully. "I'd like to visit the homes, see where the children slept, speak with the parents." "They're expecting you," Matthews said. "Though I warn you, grief has made them desperate for answers I couldn't provide." The Henderson home was the first stop, a small farmhouse with a vegetable garden and a chicken coop. It sat at the end of a dirt lane bordered by oak trees. Sarah Henderson, a woman of perhaps 30 with exhaustion etched into her face, invited them inside. "Isaac was our only child," she said, leading them to a small bedroom where a child's clothes still hung on pegs along the wall. A wooden horse lay on the floor, untouched since its owner had last played with it. He was in perfect health, always running, always laughing. "Tell me about the night he passed," Thomas said gently. Sarah twisted her apron in her hands. "It was ordinary, like any other. Supper, then Isaac played while I cleaned up. John, my husband, read from the Bible, as he does every evening. Then it was time for bed." Her voice faltered. "Isaac asked if I heard the pretty lady singing. I told him I didn't hear anything. He said she was singing just for him and it made him feel sleepy and nice." "Did he describe this lady? Or the song?" "He said she had long dark hair and wore a white dress. The song had no words, just a melody." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I thought he was making up stories, as children do. I kissed him goodnight and left him to sleep. In the morning, he was cold. Just gone. Thomas examined the room carefully, noting the location of the bed near a window that overlooked the backyard and woods beyond. Was the window open that night? No, sir. It was still too cold for that. And did you or your husband hear anything unusual during the night? Footsteps, perhaps, or the sound of the door? Sarah shook her head. Nothing at all. We would have woken if someone had entered the house. The visits to the Patterson and Miller homes yielded similar accounts. Emma Patterson had told her mother about the beautiful singing lady with sad eyes who made her feel floaty and warm. Samuel Miller had asked his parents if the lady in white who sings by his window could come inside where it was warm. In each case, the parents had heard nothing. In each case, the child had passed peacefully in the night with no signs of struggle or distress. And in each case, the child's bedroom had a window facing the woods that bordered the eastern edge of town. By late afternoon, Thomas had developed a theory, though it seemed implausible. He requested a meeting with Mayor Crawford and Reverend Porter at the town hall, where he shared his initial findings. I believe these children may have been exposed to some form of toxin that affected their hearts, he explained. Perhaps something that induced hallucinations before death, explaining the reports of singing. A toxin? Mayor Crawford looked skeptical. From where? That I cannot yet say. It could be in the water, though that seems unlikely as more would be affected. It could be a plant or fungus the children encountered while playing. Reverend Porter's expression darkened. Or it could be something more sinister. There are stories, Dr. Hargrove. Old stories about these woods. Reverend, the mayor warned, let's not alarm the doctor with local superstitions. What stories? Thomas asked, his curiosity piqued. The Reverend hesitated, then spoke in a lower voice. There was a family that lived on the edge of town before the war, the Blackwoods. They kept to themselves mostly. The father was a trapper, gone for weeks at a time. The mother died in childbirth, leaving a daughter, Eliza. The girl was different. Didn't speak until she was 5, and even then rarely. But she could sing. Lord, how she could sing. What happened to this family? The father was killed in the early days of the war. Eliza was about 16 then. With no relatives to care for her, the town tried to help. Offered her work, a place to stay, but she refused. Said she had to stay in her cabin to care for the little ones. People assumed she meant younger siblings, but there weren't any. Just her alone in that cabin. Mayor Crawford sighed. One night, the cabin caught fire. By the time anyone noticed, it was too late. The place burned to the ground. They found what they believed to be Eliza's remains, but he exchanged a glance with the Reverend. But some say she didn't die, Reverend Porter continued. That she still wanders the woods, singing to children, trying to find her little ones. Thomas fought the urge to dismiss the tale outright. As a man of science, he had little patience for ghost stories. Yet, as a physician who had witnessed the inexplicable, he knew better than to disregard any possibility, however remote. Where was this cabin located? About a mile east of town, the mayor said. Nothing there now but charred ruins and overgrowth. I'd like to see it, Thomas decided. Tomorrow, if possible. That evening, as Thomas recorded his observations in his journal, a soft knock came at his door. Mrs. Holloway stood there, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with the mayor and Reverend earlier, she said, about Eliza Blackwood. You knew her? Mrs. Holloway entered the room, closing the door behind her. Everyone knew of her, but few knew her. I was one of the few. I was younger then, of course, teaching at the school. Eliza never attended. Her father claimed to educate her at home. But I would see her in town occasionally, trailing behind him like a shadow. The Reverend mentioned she could sing. Like an angel, Mrs. Holloway confirmed. The first time I heard her was at a town gathering, some celebration or other. Someone asked her to sing, and though she was painfully shy, her father urged her on. The moment she opened her mouth, every person there fell silent. It was enchanting. Unearthly, almost. And these are little ones she spoke of after her father's death. Mrs. Holloway's expression grew troubled. That's what concerns me, Doctor. You see, there were rumors even before the war. Children who wandered too far into the woods reported hearing singing. Some claimed to have seen a girl who invited them to follow her deeper into the forest. Most resisted, but a few didn't return home until the next day with no memory of where they'd been. You believe Eliza was luring children into the woods? I don't know what to believe. But after her father died, the rumors intensified. Then came the fire, and for years, all was quiet. Until now. Thomas considered this new information. Why would she target children now? Mrs. Holloway shook her head. I can't say. But there's something else you should know. Eliza had a peculiar fascination with death. Once she told me that dying was like falling asleep, except the little ones would take you to a beautiful place where no one ever cried or hurt. When I asked who these little ones were, she said they were children who lived in the woods and only she could see them. A chill ran down Thomas's spine despite his rational mind rejecting the implication. Mrs. Holloway, you don't actually believe. What I believe, she interrupted, is that something tragic happened to a troubled young woman, and now something equally tragic is happening to our children. Whether those events are connected, I cannot say. But I thought you should have all the facts. After she left, Thomas found sleep elusive. The wind had picked up, rustling the branches of the oak tree outside his window. In the distance, an owl hooted mournfully. He found himself straining to hear any sound that might resemble singing, but there was only the familiar symphony of a spring night. The next morning, Benjamin led Thomas through the woods east of town. The path was overgrown, suggesting few ventured this way anymore. After nearly an hour of walking, they reached a small clearing where the burnt remnants of a cabin stood, reclaimed by nature over the years. Wildflowers grew among the blackened timbers, and birds nested in what remained of the stone chimney. This is where the Blackwoods lived, Benjamin said, visibly uncomfortable. Folks don't come here much. Thomas circled the ruins, noting the layout of the former dwelling. It had been modest, perhaps 2 rooms at most. Near what would have been the back of the cabin, he discovered the remains of a small garden, now wild with herbs and flowers, some he recognized as medicinal plants commonly used in folk remedies. Foxglove, nightshade, monk's hood. Benjamin, do you know if Eliza or her father practiced herbal medicine? The young man shrugged. Mr. Blackwood was known to treat his own ailments rather than visit Dr. Matthews. Some said he taught Eliza about plants and their properties. Thomas knelt to examine the plants more closely. Many were harmless, but others could be deadly if misused. Foxglove, in particular, contained compounds that affected the heart. In controlled doses, it could treat dropsy and heart conditions. In excess, it could stop a heart entirely. Has anyone reported seeing a woman near town recently? A stranger, perhaps? Not that I've heard, Benjamin replied. Though children often speak of a lady in the woods who sings pretty songs. Parents dismiss it as imagination. Thomas collected samples of several plants, carefully wrapping them in paper. If his suspicions were correct, these might provide answers more plausible than ghost stories. Upon returning to town, Thomas sought out Dr. Matthews to discuss his findings. The elderly physician listened with growing concern as Thomas outlined his theory. You believe someone is using plant extracts to poison children? But how would they administer such a toxin without the parents' knowledge? I'm not certain, Thomas admitted. But these plants, particularly foxglove, can cause hallucinations before death. The children might have interpreted these hallucinations as singing. Dr. Matthews looked unconvinced. But why would anyone do such a thing? And how would they target specific children? These were questions Thomas couldn't answer yet. He spent the remainder of the day examining his plant samples and consulting his medical texts. By evening, he had confirmed that several of the plants contained compounds that could cause cardiac arrest if properly prepared and administered. At supper, the boarding house table was unusually quiet. Mrs. Holloway served beef stew and fresh bread, but the conversation was subdued, as if a pall had fallen over the gathering. It wasn't until dessert, apple pie with cream, that Mayor Crawford broke the somber mood. There's to be a town meeting tomorrow evening, he announced. People are demanding answers, Dr. Hargrove. I hope you'll have some to provide. Thomas chose his words carefully. I have a theory, but I need more evidence before making any definitive claims. The mayor nodded, though his expression suggested he had hope for more. Well, do what you can. Folks are talking about leaving town if this continues. First the war, then drought, now this. It's more than many can bear. As they finished their meal, a commotion outside drew their attention. Benjamin burst through the door, his face ashen. Doctor, come quick! The Williams girl, Charlotte, she says she heard singing outside her window. Thomas grabbed his medical bag and followed Benjamin at a run. The Williams home was on the north side of town, a well-maintained two-story house with a wraparound porch. Inside, they found a scene of barely contained panic. Abigail Williams clutched her 7-year-old daughter to her chest while her husband James paced the floor, a shotgun in his hands. She says there's a lady singing outside, Abigail explained, her voice trembling. A lady in a white dress with long dark hair, just like the others described. Charlotte, a small girl with blonde braids, looked more curious than frightened. She has a pretty voice, she said. She sings about a place where children can play forever and never grow old or sad. Thomas approached the child carefully. Charlotte, did you see this lady, or just hear her? I saw her through my window. She was standing by the big oak tree. She waved at me and smiled, and then she started to sing. James Williams' knuckles whitened around the shotgun. I went outside with my lantern the moment Abigail called for me. There was no one there, Doctor. No footprints in the soft earth beneath the tree. No sign anyone had been there at all. Thomas examined Charlotte thoroughly. Her pulse was normal, her eyes clear, her breathing steady. There were no signs of exposure to any toxin he could detect. Has Charlotte eaten or drunk anything unusual today? Anything given to her by a stranger? The parents exchanged a glance before shaking their heads. She hasn't left our sight, Abigail insisted. She hasn't even been outside today due to the rain. I'd like Charlotte to stay awake tonight if possible, Thomas said. Give her strong tea or coffee if necessary. I'll remain here to monitor her condition. James looked ready to object but seemed to think better of it. Very well, Doctor. But I'll be standing guard at her door all night, gun in hand. As the evening progressed, Thomas divided his attention between Charlotte and the window through which she claimed to have seen the singing woman. The oak tree stood about 20 yards from the house, its massive branches swaying gently in the breeze. From time to time, he thought he caught a glimpse of movement among the shadows, but it was likely just leaves stirring in the wind. Charlotte remained awake until well past midnight, playing checkers with Thomas and chatting about her friends in school. Eventually, despite the cup of coffee her mother had reluctantly allowed her to sip, her eyelids began to droop. "I'm so sleepy," she murmured. The lady said sleep is how children visit the special place. Thomas felt a chill. "What else did the lady tell you, Charlotte?" "That she's lonely without her little ones, that she needs new friends to keep her company." Charlotte yawned. "She said she'd come back tomorrow night and sing me to the special place." Despite Thomas's recommendation, Charlotte eventually succumbed to sleep around 3 o'clock in the morning. He monitored her closely, checking her pulse and breathing every half hour. To everyone's relief, she woke with the dawn, tired but otherwise unharmed. Thomas returned to his room at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house to change his clothes and gather his thoughts. The events of the night had left him more perplexed than ever. Charlotte had exhibited no signs of poisoning, yet her description of the singing woman matched those of the children who had died. If this was not a case of poisoning, what could explain these occurrences? As he washed his face in the basin, a thought occurred to him. What if there was indeed a woman, flesh and blood, not a ghost, who was visiting these children? Perhaps someone with knowledge of the Blackwood story, using it to create fear. But that still didn't explain how the children had died without any signs of violence or disease. The town meeting that evening was held in the church, the only building large enough to accommodate nearly every resident of Elmwood. Thomas sat at the front with Mayor Crawford, Reverend Porter, and Dr. Matthews. Facing a sea of worried faces, Mayor Crawford opened the proceedings with a brief prayer for guidance, then addressed the gathering. "Friends and neighbors, we've called this meeting to discuss the tragedy that has befallen our community. Dr. Hargrove has been investigating these incidents, and we've asked him to share his findings thus far." Thomas stood, acutely aware of the weight of expectation in the room. "Good evening. I want to thank you all for your cooperation during my investigation. I know these are frightening times, especially for those of you with young children." He outlined what he had learned about the 3 deaths and Charlotte Williams' experience the previous night. He mentioned his theory about plant toxins but acknowledged that he had found no evidence of how such toxins might have been administered, particularly in Charlotte's case. At this point, he concluded, "I cannot offer a definitive explanation for what has occurred. However, I believe it would be prudent for all families with children to take certain precautions, keep windows locked at night, do not allow children to wander alone, especially near the woods, and report any unusual sightings or sounds immediately." The response was immediate and heated. Parents demanded more concrete answers and action. Some called for a search of the woods, others for the town to hire guards to patrol at night. A few of the more superstitious residents suggested exhuming Eliza Blackwood's remains and performing rituals to lay her spirit to rest. Amidst the clamor, a woman's voice cut through the noise. "Perhaps we should ask what the children have been seeing." Heads turned toward Elizabeth Foster, the school teacher who had replaced Mrs. Holloway years earlier. A young woman with a practical demeanor, she was respected for her intelligence and commitment to her pupils. "I've been talking with my students," she continued. "Many of them have claimed to have heard singing in the woods or seen a woman in white watching them from a distance. Not just the 3 who died, or Charlotte Williams, but at least a dozen others over the past few months." This revelation sent a fresh wave of panic through the crowd. Mayor Crawford struggled to maintain order as parents began questioning whether their children had seen or heard anything unusual. "Why didn't they tell us?" one mother cried. "Children often keep secrets from adults," Elizabeth explained, "especially when they fear they won't be believed or will be punished for telling tales." Thomas stepped forward again. "Miss Foster, did any of the children provide details about this woman or the song she sang?" "They all describe her similarly, young with long dark hair and a white dress. Some say she looks sad, others that she smiles and beckons to them. The songs are described as beautiful but melancholy, without words. Just a haunting melody." "And did any of these children follow her? Or speak with her?" Elizabeth hesitated. A few admitted they had tried to follow the singing deeper into the woods, but something always stopped them, a friend calling their name, the dinner bell ringing, or simply losing sight of the woman among the trees. As the meeting continued, Thomas found his mind returning to the Blackwood cabin and the plants growing there. If Eliza had indeed survived the fire and was somehow responsible for these deaths, how was she accomplishing them? And why now, after so many years? The meeting ended with little resolved beyond increased vigilance. Men volunteered to patrol the town at night, forming impromptu groups with sharp guns and lanterns. Parents vowed to keep closer watch over their children, to keep windows locked and shuttered after dark. The school teacher, Miss Foster, agreed to speak with her pupils about avoiding strangers and reporting any unusual sightings immediately. Thomas promised to continue his investigation with renewed urgency, though privately he wondered what more he could discover without concrete evidence. As the townspeople dispersed, Thomas noticed Charlotte Williams' parents lingering near the church entrance, deep in conversation with Reverend Porter. The child herself sat on the church steps, swinging her legs idly and humming a melody Thomas couldn't identify. He approached her, sitting down on the step beside her. "That's a pretty tune," he remarked. "Did you learn it in school?" Charlotte shook her head, continuing to hum for a moment before answering. "The singing lady taught it to me. In my dreams last night." Thomas felt a flutter of alarm. "You dreamed about her?" "MHM. She took me to a beautiful garden with flowers I've never seen before. All the colors were brighter there, and the air smelled like honey. She said I could stay forever if I wanted to." Charlotte stopped swinging her legs, her expression suddenly serious. There were other children there, too. They looked happy, but they couldn't leave. The singing lady said once you come to stay, you can never go back home. "And what did you tell her?" "That I wanted to think about it. I'd miss Mama and Papa too much." Charlotte resumed her humming, the melody hauntingly beautiful yet somehow discordant, as if it contained notes that shouldn't naturally occur together. Thomas made a mental note to suggest to the Williamses that Charlotte sleep in their room for the foreseeable future, with someone awake to monitor her at all times. If Eliza Blackwood, or whoever was impersonating her, had marked the child as her next victim, they would need to take extraordinary precautions. That night, as he prepared for bed, Thomas heard a soft tapping at his window. The sound was barely audible at first, easily mistaken for a branch moved by the wind. But as he listened, it became more deliberate. Tap, 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 like a finger against glass. Pulling back the curtain, he saw nothing but darkness and the branches of a nearby tree swaying in the breeze. Yet, as he turned away, a flicker of white caught his eye from the edge of the woods beyond Mrs. Holloway's garden. Without pausing to consider the wisdom of his actions, Thomas grabbed his coat and medical bag, then slipped quietly downstairs and out the back door. The night air was cool, heavy with the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. A half-moon provided just enough illumination to navigate the garden path without a lantern, though shadows gathered thickly beneath trees and shrubs. He followed the path to the garden gate and peered into the darkness beyond. There, at the very edge of the tree line, stood a figure in white. Thomas felt his pulse quicken as he strained to make out details in the dim moonlight. It appeared to be a woman, though he couldn't discern her features clearly. Her dress was simple, ankle length, its pale fabric seeming to capture what little light there was. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, dark against the white of her garment. She raised a hand, beckoning to him, then turned and moved deeper into the woods. Thomas hesitated. The rational part of his mind argued against following a stranger into the forest at night. Elmwood might be a small town where everyone knew their neighbors, but the woods harbored dangers both natural and, if the stories were to be believed, perhaps supernatural. Yet, if this was indeed the woman the children had seen, whether Eliza Blackwood or someone posing as her, this might be his only chance to solve the mystery. Decision made, he retrieved a lantern from Mrs. Holloway's shed and lit it before setting off into the woods. The path was narrow and winding, barely visible in the lantern's glow. Branches caught at his clothes, and unseen creatures rustled in the underbrush as he passed. The nocturnal sounds of the forest surrounded him, the hooting of owls, the chirping of crickets, the occasional distant howl of what might have been a wolf or merely a farmer's dog. Several times he thought he had lost track of the white figure, only to glimpse her again in the distance, always just beyond the reach of his light. She moved with an unnatural grace, navigating the difficult terrain as if she knew every root and stone by heart. Perhaps she did, if she had grown up in these woods, as Eliza Blackwood had. The path began to climb, and Thomas found himself breathing heavily as he ascended a rocky incline. The trees thinned somewhat, allowing more moonlight to penetrate the canopy. He paused to catch his breath, setting the lantern on a nearby stump. When he looked up, the white figure was gone. Turning slowly, Thomas surveyed his surroundings. He had traveled further than he realized, deeper into the forest than he had ventured with Benjamin earlier that day. The air felt different here, still and expectant, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. The usual forest sounds had diminished, leaving an unnatural silence broken only by the soft crackling of the lantern's flame. "Hello," he called, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. "I mean you no harm. I only wish to speak with you." No response came, save for the hooting of an owl somewhere overhead. Thomas raised his lantern higher, casting its light in a wide arc around him. The surrounding trees stood like silent sentinels, their bark silver in the moonlight, their branches creating intricate patterns against the night sky. There was no sign of the woman in white. As he was about to turn back, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Through a gap in the trees, he glimpsed what appeared to be a small clearing. Moving cautiously toward it, he realized he had approached the Blackwood cabin from a different direction than his earlier visit with Benjamin. The burnt ruin stood silhouetted against the starlit sky, the remaining wall and chimney creating jagged shapes like broken teeth. The white figure was nowhere to be seen. "Hello," a smile flickered across her face, there and gone so quickly Thomas might have imagined it. "You think I'm Eliza Blackwood? Are you?" She circled the small space, trailing her fingers along the shelves of jars and bottles. "Eliza Blackwood died in a fire 15 years ago. Her body was buried in unconsecrated ground at the edge of the cemetery. Yet here you are," Thomas said, living in a chamber beneath her burned home, surrounded by her medicinal herbs. The woman sat in the single chair, arranging her white dress around her.